They begged me to forgive and forget, to let everyone move on like nothing happened. But the smell of blood, the sound of the lock clicking shut, it's carved into me forever. Some things can't be buried. Welcome to Reddit Toxic Family Telltales channel. New episode every day. I'll never forget the exact second I lost all respect for a teacher. It happened in Spanish class and it started with a mistake that wasn't even mine. I'd skipped breakfast. My glucose monitor began shrieking, that sharp piercing beep that makes your stomach drop. My chest tightened as I whispered, "I need to see the nurse." My words came out broken, wheezy. I was already dizzy. The student teacher frowned like I had just asked for a favor during movie time. "The state inspector is here," she snapped. "Nobody moves until he's gone." I blinked at her in disbelief. "You don't get it. I'm diabetic." She rolled her eyes. "Be patient. It's only 20 minutes. Only 20 minutes? My vision was already going blurry. I tried to move toward the door anyway, one shaky step at a time when I heard it, another sharp beep. Then her voice. Cold. Cutting. Student badge access disabled. I'm not letting some teenager with a victim complex ruin my evaluation. Victim complex? My glucose monitor screamed again, louder this time, like it was begging for someone to notice. She stomped over, ripped it straight off my arm and hissed, "That's enough. No more disruptions, Lucia." That's when one of my classmates shouted, "That's for her blood sugar levels." Miss Winter snapped, "Sit down." My body felt like it was shutting down piece by piece, but then I spotted movement at the door, the security guard. His eyes met mine through the glass. Relief washed over me for a second, until Miss Winter's voice sliced through the air. "Don't even try. We're under state review. You open that door, you're fired." He froze. Looked at me. Then at her. And he walked away. That was the moment the panic really set in. White-hot pain shot through me up my spine. I knew the clock was ticking. I had maybe 15 minutes before I passed out, slipped into a coma, or worse. Phones shot up in the air as kids tried to call for help, but of course we were on the 4th floor. The one classroom where there's never a signal. "Put those phones away." Miss Winter shrieked. "You think I'm stupid? Recording this little performance." She spun back to me. "Empty your pockets. Now." My trembling hands spilled candy wrappers onto the floor. She kicked them away, her lip curling. "See? Always eating candy. Always claiming you need sugar." It felt like fire ants were crawling under my skin. She yanked my glucose meter from my backpack and threw it in front of me. "Test yourself. Prove this emergency." I tried, I really did. But my fingers were on fire, too clumsy to even hold the test strips. They scattered like confetti on the floor. She sneered. "You can't even fake it properly." My skull felt like it was about to split open. Then I caught a glimpse of movement, Jake digging through his bag. He held up a Nature Valley wrapper, and as soon as Miss Winter turned her back, he slid it across the floor toward me. Crinkle. Her head whipped around. What was that? We froze like statues. She stormed over, grabbed the bar and crushed it in her fist right above the trash can. Crumbs rained down like snow. No outside food during inspection. Rules are rules. 7 minutes left. My stomach cramped so hard I thought I'd vomit right there. And then, shockingly, Trevor, the class bully, stood up. "My dad's diabetic. She needs sugar now." "Suspension," Miss Winter snapped, effective immediately. Before Trevor could push back, the teacher's pet piped up. "She always does this during tests. Remember last semester?" "You're crazy, Ashley." Another kid shouted. "Look at her lips, they're blue." 6 minutes. I tried to stand, but my legs buckled. Every inch of my body screamed in pain, but still no one dared move. So I dragged myself toward the door. Literally dragged. My palms scraped against the floor. I was reaching for the third pole when... Crunch. Miss Winter's heel came down right on my hand. "No one's leaving before 3 p.m. No exceptions. Someone help her." Sarah was crying now. Miss Winter's voice was sharp, final. "Anyone who moves gets a 0 for the quarter." 3 minutes. Trevor was at the door, swiping his badge again and again. Beep. Access denied. Other kids crowded behind him, trying too, desperation in their voices. My tongue was swelling, filling my throat. Each breath was a battle. Miss Winter crouched down until her face was inches from mine. "You know what happened last year when your mother tried to get me fired? I learned exactly what kind of family you come from." 1 minute. My heart thundered so hard my ribs ached. She leaned closer, so close I could see the tiny hairs in her nose. "Pathetic. Your whole family. Pathetic liars." Crack. I slammed my forehead into her nose. Pain exploded in my skull, but her scream, oh, her scream was worth it. Blood spattered everywhere. I grabbed the lanyard swinging from her neck and clawed my way to the door. Every inch forward was torture. But then... Click. Access granted. Trevor yanked the door open. "Get the nurse. Call 911. Kids were screaming, running into the hall. Behind me, Miss Winter's voice shrieked, muffled and wild. "She's faking. They're all being dramatic. This is sabotage." But when the paramedics arrived, they said my blood sugar had dropped to 19. I had been technically brain dead for 2 minutes. Miss Winter was put on temporary leave. But in my mind? That wasn't nearly enough. She'd nearly killed me. And I wasn't the only one who wanted payback. We all did. And that's where the Real story begins. The ambulance ride was nothing but flashing lights, beeping machines and voices calling out numbers that kept getting lower and lower. I drifted in and out, barely aware of the needles stabbing into my veins. By the time they wheeled me into the ER, my body felt like it was shutting down completely. Nurses swarmed me, sticking new monitors to my chest and arms. The 4 burned going in, but even that pain didn't compare to the pounding in my skull from where I'd smashed heads with Miss Winter. A doctor with dark circles under his eyes leaned over me and said I'd have to wear a continuous glucose sensor for at least 6 months. My body had gone through too much trauma. My mom sat beside me, clutching my hand so tightly her nails dug into my skin. She didn't even flinch. She just kept nodding, whispering, "You're lucky to be alive." Lucky. That word hit me like a punch. My brain felt like it was wading through mud, but one thing cut through crystal clear, the rage simmering in my chest. A nurse started snapping photos of the purple bruise on my hand, the exact spot where Miss Winter stomped down on it. She laid out the broken pieces of my glucose monitor from my backpack and printed out all my readings from the last 12 hours. When she looked at the numbers, she muttered under her breath, "This is criminal negligence." That's when a social worker appeared with a clipboard stacked with forms. She asked if I wanted to file a report with Child Protective Services. I didn't even wait for her to finish. My hand shot out for the pen and I signed everything she shoved in front of me. Later that night, while I was still strapped to 3 different machines, Mom's phone lit up. She answered and put it on speaker. It was the principal. His voice was smooth, calculated, every word polished like he'd practiced in the mirror. He talked about unfortunate incidents and reviewing protocols, but never once, not once, did he say he was sorry. He went on about liability insurance, district policies, risk management. Like me, almost dying was just a line item on a spreadsheet. When the nurses finally said I was stable enough to hold my phone, it practically exploded with notifications. The class group chat was a wall of panic. Kids saying they couldn't believe what happened, how terrified they were, how someone should have stepped in sooner. Lucia sent me a voice message, her words broken up with sobs, saying she'd wanted to help but she was too scared of being suspended. Jake texted, apologizing about the granola bar, said he wished he'd just thrown it harder across the room. Sarah sent screenshots showing it was already blowing up on Instagram. As Mom went over discharge papers with the doctors, I opened the voice recorder on my phone. My throat was dry, but I forced the words out. I whispered everything. Every cruel sentence Miss Winter spat about my family being pathetic manipulators. Every second she let tick by while I begged for help. The way the security guard looked at me before turning away. I saved the recording in 3 different spots, then emailed it to myself twice. No way was I letting this vanish. That night at home, lying in my own bed, Mom sat down beside me and finally told me what happened last year. She admitted she'd tried to get Miss Winter fired before, after she made another diabetic student wait 20 minutes to test their sugar during a quiz. 3 other parents had filed complaints too. But Miss Winter was still technically a student teacher, and the union claimed she just needed more training. But this time? This time we had proof. Witnesses. Medical records. There was no brushing this under the rug. The next morning, Trevor messaged me privately. I was halfway through breakfast when his name popped up. He said his dad, who's been type 1 diabetic for 30 years, wanted to write a statement for our case. Trevor even apologized for every crappy thing he'd ever said to me before. Said watching me almost die messed him up. He couldn't stop picturing my lips turning blue. He admitted it haunted his dreams. I stared at his message for 5 full minutes, not even knowing how to respond. Then came Ashley. She was already blowing up the group chat, saying I planned the whole thing to get Miss Winter in trouble. She dragged up the time my blood sugar crashed during state testing last semester and claimed I was creating a pattern. She even bragged that her mom knew someone on the school board who swore Miss Winter was an excellent teacher. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped my phone, but instead of replying I screenshotted everything. That afternoon the security guard found my Instagram. He sent me a DM, pages of excuses and apologies. He admitted he knew he was wrong to walk away. But he said he had 3 kids and if he lost his job, his whole family would end up on the street. He begged me not to file a formal complaint. My stomach churned reading his words, but I screenshotted those too and saved them in my evidence folder. 2 days later, I had to go back to the school for a meeting with the nurse to update my care plan. She looked wrecked, like she hadn't slept in days. She apologized over and over, even though none of this was her fault. She promised to document how the 4th floor is a cell phone dead zone, a literal death trap for medical emergencies. She said she'd recommend putting a landline in every classroom and making sure every teacher actually knew what to do if a diabetic kid crashed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Miss Winter's rage. She didn't just see me as a disruption. The way she spat out comments about my mom trying to get her fired, the way she branded us pathetic lying manipulators, it felt personal. Like this wasn't just about control during an inspection. It was about revenge. And that thought chilled me more than anything else. 2 days later, the district's 504 coordinator knocked on our door carrying a thick folder and a laptop that looked like it weighed as much as a brick. She set everything up right there on our kitchen table while Mom fussed over the coffee pot, and I sat across from her absent-mindedly picking at the bandage on my arm. The coordinator flipped open the folder, pulled out stacks of forms and began explaining, calm, methodical, like she'd done this 100 times. Your disability accommodations were violated, she said, sliding papers toward us. This could escalate into a federal matter. Mom's pen practically flew across her notepad, scribbling down every word. Meanwhile, I just sat there watching the coordinator's mouth move. Half the terms washed over me like static. Section this, precedent that, due process hearing here. My brain was still too foggy to keep up. But even through the haze, I caught enough to realize one thing: we had a real case. The next morning, I decided to do a little digging myself. I called the main office and asked about the supposedly all-important state inspection that Miss Winter had nearly killed me over. The secretary put me on hold, shuffled papers around for what felt like forever, then came back sounding almost confused. It was just a routine yearly check, she said. Happens all the time. My heart dropped. I pressed her for details. So, are teachers supposed to lock down classrooms for it? She actually laughed. Lockdown? No. The only guideline is to keep things running as normal as possible. Normal? Miss Winter had invented the entire nobody moves policy herself. My stomach twisted. She'd risked my life for her own delusion of control. That same afternoon, Lucia texted everyone, library. After school. Bring everything. Jake was the first to show, backpack slung low on his shoulder. Sarah arrived next, biting her lip, her eyes darting like she was afraid we'd get caught. Trevor came last, pretending to be bored, but I saw the tension in his jaw. We crowded around one of the big wooden tables and dumped our stuff out. Notebooks, pens, scraps of paper. We started piecing together the day like detectives working a crime scene. Jake reached into his bag and carefully pulled out the crushed Nature Valley wrapper he'd kept hidden, the same one Miss Winter had destroyed. Sarah flipped through her notes. She'd been sneaking glances at her phone during class, so she had timestamps for everything. Trevor grabbed a pencil and sketched out a diagram of the classroom, marking where everyone sat and who tried to help first. Lucia spread out a sheet of paper and drew a timeline, minute by minute, from the second my monitor beeped to the moment the paramedics burst in. By the end, we had a pile of evidence spread across the table. We didn't just have memories anymore, we had proof. Hard, undeniable proof. And to make sure none of it disappeared, we photocopied everything. 3 copies each. 1 for me. 1 for Mom. 1 for backup. Whatever came next, we weren't walking in unprepared. My first full day back at school felt like getting slammed by a freight train. The second I stepped into the hallway, I could feel every pair of eyes on me. Kids whispering behind cupped hands, some glancing away when I caught their gaze, others staring openly like I was some kind of walking headline. Half of them looked at me with pity, the other half with this weird fascination, like I was a sideshow attraction because I'd nearly died. But the worst moment came when I walked past the Spanish classroom. My chest locked up so tight I couldn't breathe. My hands shook violently and black dots swam across my vision just like that day. My knees buckled and I stumbled straight into the nurse's office. She let me collapse onto the cot and immediately called the school counselor. The counselor tried to soothe me, saying panic attacks were a normal trauma response. But nothing about it felt normal. Nothing about being back in that building felt safe. She handed me breathing exercises and wrote me a pass to skip Spanish for the rest of the week. 3 days later, Mom and I got called into the principal's office. He sat there behind his oversized desk, shifting uncomfortably while we sat across from him in those awful hard plastic chairs. He confirmed Miss Winter was on paid administrative leave paid, while the district investigated. Every other sentence out of his mouth circled back to the teachers' union and their lawyers, like he was trying to warn us this wasn't going to be easy. Mom leaned forward, her voice sharp as glass. Why isn't this being considered attempted murder? A teacher deliberately stopped my child from getting medical help. The principal went pale. His hands fidgeted with the papers on his desk as he stammered something about policies and proper channels. It was pathetic. The next Monday, I got blindsided again. The assistant principal called me into her office and slid a slip of paper across the desk. Detention. For assault. I blinked at it, my mind refusing to process. You're punishing me for headbutting her? Her tone was cold, rehearsed. Violence is never acceptable, regardless of circumstances. My panic spiked. I called Mom. 10 minutes later, she stormed in like a thundercloud, took one look at the slip, and laughed bitterly in the woman's face. You can try giving my child detention, Mom said, her voice dripping with venom, but our lawyer will love hearing how you punished a dying student for trying to survive. The assistant principal's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. She just yanked the slip back, ripped it in half, and tossed it in the trash. That afternoon, the nurse called me down again. Her desk was covered in stacks of my medical files, boxes full of documents. For 2 hours, we went through everything, page by page. Every official notification of my diagnosis. Every emergency plan filed. Every meeting where my condition was discussed. We built a timeline out of sticky notes, covering her desk with dates and details. By the end, the stack of evidence was so thick we had to bind it with a rubber band. It was undeniable proof the school knew what to do in a diabetic emergency, and still let this happen. The very next day, a girl from the school paper stopped me at my locker. She said other students were terrified, and she wanted to interview me. The 4th floor cell phone problem doesn't just affect you, she said. It affects everyone. People need to know. Part of me wanted to disappear, let this whole thing fade away. But another part, louder, sharper, wanted the truth out in the open. I told her I'd think about it, and she handed me her card. Then came the security guard. He cornered me during lunch, pulling me into a side hallway. His eyes darted around like he was afraid of being watched. His voice was low, shaky. She threatened me. Miss Winter. When I tried to help you, she told me if I touched that door, I'd be fired. Said I already had a warning for being late, one more strike and I was gone. My blood ran cold. I pulled out my phone and hit record. He repeated everything, his voice cracking as he described watching me die through the glass. He said he'd been having nightmares, seeing my face every night. And then he looked me in the eye and said, I'll testify. If you need me, I'll do it. Finally, that Friday, the big 504 meeting happened. Mom and I sat across from the coordinator, the principal, and 2 district lawyers packed into a conference room that suddenly felt way too small. The coordinator laid it out plain and simple. I had the right to file a complaint with the Office for Civil Rights. My disability rights had been trampled on, and this wasn't just a school issue anymore. It could trigger a full federal investigation into the district. Mom glanced at me and I met her eyes. I didn't even have to say anything. We were in this together. No matter how long it took. No matter how hard they tried to fight us. We were going all the way. The very next morning my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Notifications piled up so fast the screen froze. At first I thought it was just my friends checking in, but then I saw it, an Instagram account called Classroom Truth 2024. And my stomach dropped. The page claimed I had randomly attacked Miss Winter just because she told me to wait for the nurse. They said I'd been eating candy in class, got mad when she took it away and went off on her. But the photo they used, that was the dagger. A blurry shot of her bloody nose plastered with the caption, "Student attacks teacher over snack." The comment section was a nightmare. Strangers calling me psycho, demanding I be expelled, some even asking why I hadn't been arrested yet. Hundreds of DMs poured in, people I didn't even know throwing insults like they'd been waiting for this moment. One girl from another district wrote, "Everyone knows you planned this for attention." I tried reporting the account. Instagram shot back with that robotic message, "Does not violate community guidelines." Mom set my profile to private, but the screenshots had already spread like wildfire. The damage was done. That afternoon, Trevor messaged me. He said he'd gone back to the Spanish classroom and found the trash hadn't been emptied yet. The crushed granola bar wrapper? Still there. Covered in pencil shavings and scraps of paper. And get this, Trevor, the guy who used to make my life hell, put on latex gloves from the science lab and bagged it up like a detective. He took photos of the trash can, the wrapper, his phone with the date and time, all of it. His dad had taught him how to handle evidence for court cases. Suddenly, the school bully was on my side and I couldn't help but think, maybe near-death experiences change more than just the victim. That same night, someone dropped a shared Google Doc link in our class group chat. Witness statements. One by one, people started typing what they saw. Some defended me. Others stayed neutral. One kid wrote that my lips turned blue. Another admitted they heard Miss Winter say nobody was allowed to leave. Ashley, of course, chimed in. She wrote that I always pull stunts on important days, and that this was just another fake emergency. But then someone posted screenshots from our actual group chat during the incident. Timestamps told the truth. 2:47 p.m., she looks like she's dying. Should we call 911? 2:49 p.m., Miss Winter won't let us. 2:50 p.m., we can't just sit here, what if she passes out? Message after message, kids panicking while I collapsed, but too scared to move. The next morning, the editor of the school newspaper took things nuclear. She filed a Freedom of Information Act request for the badge logs and any emails about the so-called inspection. The principal lost it, called her parents and accused her of disrupting the investigation. But her parents weren't backing down. Public records are public records, they told him. She even posted online that the school had 30 days to respond, but it was clear they were already scrambling. Meanwhile, the school nurse wrote a 3-page report tearing the district to shreds. She described the 4th-floor dead zone as a death trap and highlighted how detention for assault made the school look absurd. She even joked bitterly that next they'd start charging drowning victims with disturbing the peace for splashing too loud. She submitted it all to the school board, demanding signal boosters. The secretary emailed back that they'd review it in 3 weeks. The nurse forwarded the message to Mom with a note that read, 3 weeks could mean another dead student. Then the FOIA request came through. And it blew everything open. The emails showed the state inspector was never even in our building. They'd been across town at the elementary school all day. No lockdown order. No rule about sealed doors. Nothing. Miss Winter had made the whole thing up. And the timestamps proved the inspector's visit ended 2 hours before my emergency even started. She had lied about everything. Around that time, the security guard reached out through Mom's lawyer. We met him at a coffee shop, and he looked wrecked, eyes sunken, hands trembling so bad his cup rattled against the saucer. He said he'd give a statement, but begged us to include that he tried to help at first. "I've got 3 kids," he whispered. "I couldn't lose my job." His voice cracked as he described watching me through the window, lips blue, body shaking, and turning away. He admitted he was haunted by nightmares of that moment. In the end, he wrote it all down. Every word. 2 weeks later, the hammer dropped. An official letter arrived at our house, disciplinary hearing for assault. They were charging me for headbutting Miss Winter, threatening me with suspension or even expulsion. Our lawyer called it what it was, retaliation. He documented every detail, saying the school was flipping the narrative, painting me as the villain to save themselves. That night I snapped. I was done hiding while strangers called me crazy. I went online and posted my side. All of it. I wrote out exactly what happened. Attached my hospital records showing my blood sugar at 19. Uploaded the paramedics' report stating I was technically dead for 2 minutes. The internet exploded. Some people flooded me with support, sharing their own horror stories about teachers abusing power. Others doubled down, calling me a liar, accusing me of chasing attention. One woman flat out wrote, she should be in jail for assault. I spent 6 straight hours blocking trolls, reporting death threats, watching my truth get twisted in real time. And I realized, this wasn't just about Miss Winter anymore. This was about survival, both in class and online. And the fight had only just begun. The 504 coordinator called an emergency meeting the very next day. She sat across from me with this firm, careful look and said, going public could hurt the federal investigation. You need to be careful. She pulled out examples of other cases that had crumbled because of social media, families who overshared, and suddenly all their hard work was gone. Her warning made my stomach twist. Staying quiet felt like surrender. Like letting Miss Winter keep control. In the end, we struck a deal. I would only post facts. No theories about Miss Winter's motives. No speculation about why she did what she did. Just the truth, documented and undeniable. But Ashley? She had other plans. The very next morning, she was camped out at the main entrance with a clipboard and this fake sweet smile plastered on her face. She told anyone who would listen that Miss Winter was just doing her job, that state inspector rules were super strict. And kids who hadn't even been in the room that day, started signing. Some were her friends from student council. Others just wanted to look like they were supporting teachers. I stood at the second-floor window and watched as signature after signature filled her page. Trevor texted me at lunch, "She's already got 30. By 2:15, Ashley strutted into the principal's office, handed over her petition, and walked out grinning like she'd just won a prize. 2 days later, the fire alarm went off during third period. That shrill, piercing wail ripped through the hallway, and my whole body locked up. It was the exact same pitch as my glucose monitor from that day. My hands started shaking. I couldn't breathe. Everyone else was filing out toward the parking lot, but my legs turned to jelly. I dropped right there against the lockers, curling up as the walls pressed in. My chest clamped down like I was suffocating. Kids stepped over me like I was just another obstacle on the way outside. It was the nurse who finally found me. She knelt beside me, whispering softly while I hyperventilated. She had to call my mom, who showed up within 10 minutes. I shook the entire ride home, unable to stop. That same afternoon, our lawyer called with a bombshell. The IT department had pulled the badge system logs from that day. The record showed Miss Winter manually disabled student access at 2:47 p.m. The inspector didn't even arrive until 3:15. She'd locked us in nearly 30 minutes before anyone official even showed up. The lawyer's voice sharpened over the phone. "This proves intent. She planned it. She knew what she was doing." The very next day, the security guard's written statement came in. Reading it made my blood boil. Word for word, he wrote how Miss Winter told him if he opened that door, he'd be fired. How she leaned in and actually told him to think about his kids. His twin daughters in elementary school, she used them to twist the knife. She weaponized his family against him while I was dying on the other side of the glass. We added his testimony straight into the growing evidence pile. By Friday, we filed the formal 504 complaint. The paperwork was thicker than some of my textbooks. It laid out every violation: Miss Winter destroying my glucose monitor, medical equipment, blocking me from the nurse during a clear emergency, ordering students not to help me, using intimidation to silence witnesses. And Mom's complaint from last year was stapled right to the back. A pattern of discrimination, documented and undeniable. The district had 7 days to respond. 3 days in, the principal called my mom. His voice was oily, rehearsed. He suggested a restorative justice meeting. Miss Winter would apologize, we'd all shake hands and move forward without pressing charges. Mom let out this sharp, bitter laugh. "If someone nearly killed your child, would you accept an apology?" Silence. He stumbled over his words, muttering something about consulting with the district. Mom hung up. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My brain wouldn't stop spinning. Firing Miss Winter wouldn't be enough. That would just make her someone else's problem. Other kids like me, could end up trapped, ignored, dying, just like I had. So the next morning I told Mom, "We can't just fight for revenge. We need to make sure this never happens again." We brainstormed right there at the breakfast table. New policies. Emergency protocols for medical situations. Mandatory training for every teacher on diabetes and other conditions. Clear rules about when students can leave class to seek medical help, no exceptions. Mom's eyes lit up. She said turning all this pain into change was the only way to make something good come out of it. By the afternoon, we were at the kitchen table again, drafting our demands for the school board. This time, we weren't just fighting for me. We were fighting for everyone. 2 days later, a thick envelope showed up in our mailbox with Miss Winter's union stamp on the front. Inside was a letter from their lawyer threatening me with assault charges. According to them, I had attacked her while she was trying to help. They warned that if we kept pushing our case, they'd press charges. Our lawyer didn't even hesitate. Within an hour, he was on the phone spelling it out for them. Self-defense during a medical emergency is an assault. And threatening a minor victim? That's witness intimidation. By the end of the day, the union's tough talk shrank down to a one-line email: "We are reviewing the situation." The following week, we sat down with a civil attorney downtown. She specialized in cases against individual teachers, not just school districts. She laid out the options in plain English. We could sue Miss Winter personally for assault. We could also pursue false imprisonment since she locked us in that classroom. But the strongest angle? Emotional distress. She explained how damages could wipe out Miss Winter financially: her house, her car, her retirement. Mom wanted to file right away, but I asked for time. The school board meeting was in 2 days and they'd already slotted our case into public comments. 3 minutes. That's all we'd get. 3 minutes to tell them how I nearly died begging for help. 3 minutes to make them understand why everything had to change. Mom and I practiced over and over, stopwatch in hand, making sure every second counted. The morning of the meeting, my phone blew up again. Kids were forwarding me a new statement, straight from the state inspector's office. On their website, they'd posted that they never told anyone to lock down classrooms during visits. They even said they were worried about how their name had been twisted to harm students. Mom printed 20 copies of that statement and stuffed them into her folder like ammunition. The next day at school, everything shifted. About 50 kids sat down in the main hallway during lunch, holding handmade signs demanding cell service on the 4th floor and new medical emergency rules. The principal paced past them, face tight, while teachers begged them to move. Security guards hovered but didn't intervene. Detention slips got handed out, but the kids didn't budge. Then one student's mom showed up with a news camera, and the principal vanished into his office like smoke. That same afternoon, the nurse rolled out a new form for kids with medical conditions. She called it something technical, but everyone else renamed it instantly, the survival clause. It gave us the right to leave class for emergencies without asking permission. 3 days later came my disciplinary hearing. It was in this tiny conference room that smelled like stale coffee and old carpet. They handed me 3 days of in-school suspension for headbutting Miss Winter, but the woman reading the decision kept repeating phrases like extreme circumstances and life-threatening situation. Our lawyer whispered afterward that it was actually good. They'd basically admitted I was dying. And honestly, the suspension room had better Wi-Fi than most classrooms. Silver linings. But one thing kept circling in my mind, the IT logs. Miss Winter disabled our badges at 2:47. The inspector didn't arrive until 3:15. Did she plan this whole thing before anyone official even stepped foot in the building? 2 weeks later, the big 504 complaint hearing arrived. 5 district officials sat in a row behind a long table, faces stern. Mom had every piece of evidence neatly organized into color-coded folders. The badge log showing when access was cut, the witness statements from my classmates, the hospital records, even hallway camera footage. Miss Winter's representative clung to the excuse that she thought she was following protocol. But you could see from the district officials' expressions, they weren't buying it. The security guard showed up, pale and shaking. His hands trembled as he described watching me through the window, lips blue, body collapsing, and not being able to move because she threatened his job. He admitted she used his twin daughters to scare him into compliance. One official scribbled furiously while another just stared at Miss Winter like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. That same night was the school board meeting. Ashley marched up to the podium and launched into her speech about how Miss Winter was just trying to keep order during an important inspection. The board members kept their faces neutral, but I noticed one woman slyly pull out her phone under the table and start typing. Later, Mom whispered that she was probably Googling what happens when blood sugar drops to 19. As Ashley droned on, people in the audience started fidgeting, exchanging looks, clearly unconvinced. The very next morning, the student newspaper dropped their bombshell. Weeks of investigation went live online, complete with timestamps, interviews, and evidence showing the 4th floor cell service dead zone, Miss Winter's fabricated lockdown rule, and her blatant disregard for every safety protocol we had. The comment section lit up like a firestorm. Parents demanded meetings. By lunchtime, the local news picked it up, and reporters started swarming the school. 3 days later, Miss Winter was gone from her classroom. They tucked her away into some district office job where she couldn't be near kids anymore. She was still getting paid, which infuriated Mom, but I felt a small wave of relief. At least she couldn't hurt anyone else. The kids who staged the sit-ins still had to serve their detentions, but the way they walked the halls afterward? Heads high, grins on their faces. They knew they'd won something bigger than a protest. They'd started a movement. Within a week, the walls on the 4th floor sprouted these strange white boxes. Overnight, everyone's phones lit up with full bars. Kids joked that I'd practically had to die to get them Wi-Fi. People laughed, but when the chuckles faded, the truth hung in the air. Yeah, it wasn't really funny. 2 weeks later, the state education department rolled in like a storm. Clipboards, stern faces, sensible shoes. They combed through every classroom, every dusty policy binder, every emergency drill record going back 5 years. The principal started showing up to assemblies with dark circles etched under his eyes, hands trembling at the podium as he stammered about new safety measures. Investigators tallied 12 different violations in how they'd handled medical emergencies alone. 7 more in staff training requirements that had been completely ignored. The school board scrambled. 3 emergency meetings, 3 nights in a row. The auditorium filled with furious parents, voices rising, chairs scraping, people pointing fingers. By Monday, the board announced sweeping changes, mandatory medical emergency training for every single staff member. And over winter break, something new appeared, big red emergency buttons installed in every classroom. Press one and it connected straight to 911 and the main office. They even stuck them in bathrooms. The glowing red light was constant, impossible to miss. But not everyone was on our side. A group of parents started a Facebook page called Supporting Our Teachers. Their posts accused us of making the school look bad, warning property values would tank if the district got a reputation for being unsafe. They called my mom an opportunist, said she was milking my trauma for attention. We screenshotted every nasty message and added them to the lawyer's ever-growing folder. One afternoon, the security guard found me by my locker. We stood in silence for a moment before he spoke. His voice cracked as he said, "I'm sorry I walked away that day." I swallowed hard and told him I was sorry too, sorry he'd been trapped in that impossible position. Neither of us should have been apologizing, but somehow we both needed to say the words. He told me he was transferring to the elementary school soon. The district rewrote my 504 plan with language stronger than I'd ever seen. It spelled it out. I could leave any classroom, assembly, or situation where I felt unsafe, no questions asked. Any teacher who blocked my medical access would face immediate termination. Other students with diabetes saw my plan and demanded the same protections. Their parents brought my case into every meeting, and within weeks, the district approved identical wording for all of them. Of course, Miss Winter's union fought back. They filed an appeal claiming her due process rights had been violated. Our lawyer said it was standard procedure, that unions fought every battle, even the hopeless ones. But knowing it could drag on for months left a sour taste in my mouth. Mom found me a therapist who specialized in medical trauma. Her office had soft chairs and a calmness that felt like a blanket. She never pushed me to speak if I wasn't ready. One day she looked me in the eye and said the words no one else had dared to. What Miss Winter did was attempted manslaughter through deliberate indifference. Hearing a medical professional say she almost killed you loosened something that had been wound tight in my chest. She gave me tools to survive the panic attacks, the ones that slammed into me whenever I heard a beeping sound. She taught me how to breathe through the nightmares of that locked classroom. 5 months passed before I could walk down the 4th floor without my heart trying to escape my chest. When I finally did, I stopped in my tracks. Signal boosters gleamed on every wall. Full bars everywhere. Red emergency buttons glowed beside every door like watchful eyes. The nurse told me they'd hired 2 more medical staff just for our building. The entire emergency response system had been rewritten. Nobody, not a teacher, not a principal, not anyone, could override a medical emergency again. Not for inspections. Not for anything. Miss Winter was technically still employed, shuffling papers in some basement office downtown, waiting for the union appeals process to crawl along. She wasn't allowed within 500 feet of the school, though. And while part of me still craved more, still wanted to see her in handcuffs, wanted the words real justice stamped across her file, another part of me saw something else. I saw younger kids with their glucose monitors clipped to their belts, walking the halls without fear. I saw them glance at those glowing red buttons and know deep down, they'd never be trapped like I was. And maybe that was justice, too. Not the kind I imagined, but the kind that mattered. Sometimes that has to be enough. Thanks for watching. Today's train wreck is over, but tomorrow's ride is already on track. Subscribe so you don't miss it.